All right, Mish, welcome back. I am really excited about this session because I literally just read your daily for tonight, and it was about oxys, as you can see by the chart. And I myself have some questions to dive deeper into this one. But first, let's just set it up, let everybody know why we're talking about it. Let me zoom in on the chart here just a little bit. And if you could just give us a brief summary of why you're interested in Oxy right here.
Okay, well, I always have to give a little bit of a story. We established last week, right, about my storytelling. So I've known all along that this is a stock while Buffett is selling Apple and Bank of America. He's been accumulating a lot of shares of Occidental Petroleum. So it's always a little bit in the back of my mind, probably not the worst idea to kind of keep track of what the billionaires are doing. Not that I ever trade off of that, but it was just there in my mind. And then in terms of the timing from a fundamental standpoint, I like the fact that Occidental Petroleum and his interest in it is dual fold. One is they are working towards reducing carbon footprint, and also they could take advantage of oil and gas. And of course, we know that regardless of what happens in the election, both will probably have a lot of attention in 2025. And then, of course, from a geopolitical standpoint, it looks like things in the Middle East could still be escalating. And when I looked at an oil chart today, I looked at crude oil, and I like to look at the WTI. And if it gets through $70 a barrel, with so many people so bearish and complacent, and especially with China now buying everything under the sun, I felt that that would also potentially be a catalyst for this stock. So I've been tracking it. And then today, the reason why I wrote about it today is because I noticed a couple of really interesting things technically. So there's my marriage between the fundamental story, but the timing using the technical. So you have up the daily, right, Geoff?
Yeah, we're looking at the daily. I'll zoom in a little.
All right. So, those of you who know, I tend to be somewhat of a contrarian. When I say contrarian, I like when there's the proverbial blood in the street in particular stock or an ETF or a commodity. And that's usually what gets me interested, particularly, as I said, when there's a story. And so I noticed that this thing had this huge crash in September, and then it tried very, very hard to rally when it had its trough at the beginning of September. But you can see it didn't have a legitimate reversal pattern on that low. You see that low there, Geoff? Yeah, right there where your pen is. It had an inside day the next day. I would have watched it there. But the day after that, according to our rules about glass bottoms and brick wall bottoms, is that if you have a 2-day pattern and a 1-day pattern, the next day it has to close above the high of that day. And it did not on that third day. So I kind of ignored it again. And here it went up a few bits, but it didn't really do very much. And then lo and behold, last week it made another new low. So after it made the new low on Thursday, I noticed a couple of things on Friday. Number one is, and Geoff's got the indicator down below, is the volume, right? Is that the one on the very bottom?
No, the volume, I can bring up the volume.
Yeah, let's bring up the volume because I thought that was really interesting. Well, in the meanwhile, while he's bringing up the volume, you can see in the real motion indicator, we had that trough low there in price. We also had it in momentum, which to me starts to feel very oversold, especially when you see the volume patterns. And then Friday, it ended the week with a classic reversal pattern, right? New 60 plus day low, in this case, new 60 multi-year low, reversal on Friday, follow through today. And what Geoff is showing you now is the volume. And if you look at the volume actually has had a strong recovery up. So even though it had that sell-off last Thursday, the volume kind of didn't really go as crazy as it did on that first sell-off we showed you with that red bar. So it showed you already that the volume was drawing up to the downside. And now with this little up move, we're having now a little bit of a breakout here in volume, which says to me that there's interest coming in. So that's the daily chart. And I like it. Do I love it? Well, I bought for the fun today a starter position. So full disclosure. Looking at the leadership, it still needs more. Obviously, if this thing can start outperforming SPY, that would be very interesting to me and possibly the place to be adding. But the real reason, I shouldn't say the real reason, all of these were reasons, but another reason why this really fascinated me is, as you know, I look at several time frames, not just daily, but I look at weekly and I look at monthly. So let's put up the weekly chart.
Before we do that, I just want to point out that the same all the patterns you're looking at here in the volume, and then the pattern that you're looking for here in the leadership existed back here. So here, and it's not exactly the same, right? But we could look at, well, let's keep it simple. Here, the volume's coming around, and then here the leadership isn't ready yet. But here with this move up demonstrates that it does have some real strength. And then you're looking, if it all works out, you look for this to continue to stay up and the price continuing to ramp up. So that's kind of what, if all goes well, it could look like in the future.
That would be pretty awesome.
Well, it's always good to kind of know what you're looking for, even if it never happens.
Yeah. And let's not forget that in the geopolitical situation we have going on right now, it almost seems a crazy aberration that oil is relatively cheap, hovering around the $65 to $70 level, when you've got the Middle East kind of like having some fun blowing each other up right now. So we don't know if that's going to escalate or not, but it certainly gives us opportunity with a very low risk. And let's talk about risk. If you were going to do something like this, when you have that reversal pattern, by the way, and this is a good thing to remind people, your stop becomes very clear. And the stop would be under the low of the day that it made the low, because if it fails that, then this was a failed reversal pattern and you do not want to be long.
Yeah, and in this case, it's a double bottom as well for those
Yes.
looking.
I know you're getting me even more excited about this trade, but let's show them at the
All right, and a double bottom that took out the low of the first bottom, so it's even a better one.
right. And so this is a weekly chart Geoff's showing you now. And so you see the green is the 200 weekly, the blue is the 50 weekly. And you can see all the resistance it's had since 2022. Every time it's gotten up anywhere around $70, it has sold off, which I would imagine relates pretty well to oil at about $85 a barrel. So, that's why I don't like to look at energy related or any futures related stock companies that deal in futures without looking at the underlying futures, which is why I mention it. But what's so cool about this chart was last week, Geoff, we told everybody about the 200 week when we were talking about retail, granny, when we were talking
yeah, that's really why I wanted to dive into this article, because you point out that you were looking at the 200, and I don't think enough people pay attention to the weekly charts. And even if you were to just focus on the 50 and the 200 week moving averages on the weekly charts, as you pointed out, this is the XRT from last week. We were talking about it. Again, the big green line sat right on it. What was what was the other one? IYT.
IYT. And look, by the way, at the golden cross on that XRT that just happened. But go back to XRT. Look at that. You had a golden cross. That's when the 50 crosses back over the 200. So now we're on a weekly bullish phase in XRT after it held the 200. And with all that great consolidation, that's what we talked about last week. This could be a very exciting move in the face of a lot of people not particularly convinced that we could have any kind of exciting move.
Yeah. And what was the other one we talked about? KRE?
Oh yeah, IYT. Well, that was right. That also helped. But KRE is particularly interesting because look at that. I mean, it cleared the 50 a while ago, but now, and look at those series of higher lows from its trough in 2020, right? So you had that big low in 2020. Then in 2023, you had another low. And then you can see we've had a series of higher lows. I look for that as well. But now the fact that it's holding above the 200 week, the 50 week, look at that slope is nicely, strongly up. The 200-week moving average slope is turning up. And once again, we're in this period of consolidation like we are in XRT and even IYT and in IWM, by the way, which tells me that my modern family could be kicking some butt as we end this year and into 2025, which is great for you all because you've been following the modern family forever. And don't be afraid if it sets up.
Yeah, I just scrunch this chart down just to point out, look at how many times this 200 week really comes into play. It really is worth a few minutes of time looking at on your charts. So here's IYT.
Right.
We were talking about it
last
week, just about the fact that it held when it pulled back in July. But I mean, look at the long term.
Exactly. And the same is true for anything. If you look at the indices, I mean, some of the indices, if you're looking at Qs and SPYs, they haven't even gotten near, I don't think, their 200 week. But you can see that it did in 2022 when we had that low, that famous October low. Look where it stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah. So lucky for you guys, even if you don't look at it, I do, because every Friday I've been featuring the weekly charts for the modern family or anything else like Bitcoin. Everybody was getting so bearish in Bitcoin last week or a couple of weeks ago. Once it took out that 58 and it had that quick trip down to 52, oh, it's all over. But all it did was hold those weekly moving averages. So it's a good secret, and it definitely separates a lot of the very active herd mentality traders from those who sit back with somewhat of a bias based on a longer term. And I think Buffett does the same thing. When Buffett has bought the stock, because we think, because it's been near that 200-week moving average, and he figures, okay, this is a good long-term play.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just wrap it up with this. NVIDIA, since most people don't think of NVIDIA as something you'd find down at the 200-week moving average these days. Well, before it made its historic run, it bottomed out in October 2022, right at its 200-week moving average. You had two chances. So, moral of the story, pay attention to those weekly charts, even if all you do is look at the 50 and the 200-week moving average. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the 50-week moving average is the 200-day moving average. That's one of the things I like about looking at weekly charts, is that 50-week is the 200-day. So it gives you an easy frame of reference back to the daily chart. Mm-hmm. And the 200-week just gives you a whole new perspective.
Right. And that's why sometimes I'll extend it out even to the monthly chart. And I don't know if we have time, but if you look at the Occidental monthly chart and you put in that 23-month, 80-month, which I know a lot of our people already have programmed in because they've been listening to me talk about it for so long, it's sitting right on, that's the 200 week.
Let me put it in. I got to put in 80 month.
Well, you're in the weekly chart. Go to the bar.
Oh, yeah. It'll convert.
So I think you said to me before that the green here, forget the blue line, ignore the blue line.
The green line here is 80 month. I just made it 80.
So, I mean, I love this. So now if you put this all together, you have a reversal bottom, you have volume picking up on the upside, you've got the 200-week holding. And if you look at the monthly moving average, you have obviously, to me, this would be the place to get out if you were wrong, if you wanted to play it a little bit longer term, is if it broke down under the 80-month. But this is a 6 to 8 year business cycle. And you can see that the oil market really seriously broke down under that 80-month when we were back, what was that, 2018, 2019? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had, the post-COVID run. And so the question is right now, since COVID, is oil still very much in demand? And of course, that is the big question on, are we going to recession or not? Not since we don't think we are. All of that is sort of the fundamental story along with that.
Sounds good. We'll keep an eye on it.
Okay.
As always. Thanks, Mish. Great insight. Another gem.
All right. Thanks, Geoff. And we'll see you all next week.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.